After my husband's funeral, my son drove me to a remote road and said, "This is where you get off." The gravel crunched beneath my feet as the car door shut behind me, the sound sharp as a slammed verdict. Dust billowed in the wake of the departing car, curling into the spring air like the last breath of something sacred. I stood there, no witnesses, no tears, just a woman with a suitcase she didn't pack, left behind like an afterthought. But in that quiet, something ancient stirred, not fear, not surrender, but the weight of memory and the whisper of unfinished stories. My name is Marjorie Ann Carlisle. I'm 67 years old, and for nearly 5 decades I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet heart of Blue Haven Groves, a small, organic orange farm nestled in the sunlit hills of Northern California. My hands, though stiff with arthritis, still remember every step of kneading dough into rustic loaves and trimming branches. At dawn, with Thomas, my husband, 3 weeks ago, I buried him, Thomas, and I had been married since 1982. We built everything together, this grove, this home, this family, and yet the morning after his funeral, I realized that I might not have built what I thought I had, or maybe it just wasn't enough to hold on to my children. Thomas died of pancreatic cancer, 14 months of watching a man of the land waste away his strength, stolen bit by bit. He didn't want the kids to know. Let them live their lives a little longer without the shadow, he had whispered to me one night, his voice thick with morphine. And because I loved him, I agreed. But in truth, I already knew our children. Ethan and Rachel had grown distant long before the diagnosis. Ethan, the eldest, had carved out a fast-paced career in Seattle's financial world and hadn't been home for more than a handful of weekends in over a decade. Rachel, on the other hand, floated from one failed lifestyle venture to another, always funded by Thomas's savings and always in need of just one more loan. I had hoped that grief would bring them back to the core of who we were, that they would remember the grove, the family, dinners, the love that built this house. But when they arrived for the funeral, I didn't see children mourning their father. I saw professionals calculating an estate the night after the funeral. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the worn wood of our dining table. I told them we could sort through Thomas's things together the next day. It was a small gesture, a mother's way of making space for memory. But they had other plans the next morning. Sunlight spilled through the lace curtains Thomas and I had picked out together 30 years ago. I made coffee, the simple kind Thomas liked, not the imported blend Ethan had brought from Seattle, and waited at the kitchen table. They came downstairs dressed sharply, Ethan in a blazer. He didn't bother to remove Rachel in a silk blouse and perfectly curled hair. They looked like they were heading to a business meeting, not sitting down to remember their father. Mom, Ethan began placing his coffee mug down with that same precision I'd seen in his father. "We've been talking." Rachel glanced at him. "Then at me. "We think it's time to start settling things. The estate, the business, the house." I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. "Settling. It's practical," Ethan said. "You can't run the grove alone. And the house, it's big, Mom, too much for someone your age, my age." The words sat heavy in the room. I had pruned those trees beside Thomas through blizzards and heat waves. I had handled payroll when we couldn't afford an assistant, baked pies for fundraisers, driven tractors, delivered crates to food banks. "We want you to be comfortable," Rachel added, her voice smooth like a sales pitch. "There's a wonderful retirement community, 2 hours, South Willowbend Estates. Activities, friends your age." I stood to clear the breakfast plates, needing motion to hide my shishing hands. Then Ethan pulled out a folder. "Dad spoke to me about this last year," he said, sliding a set of documents toward me. "He wanted Julia and me to take over." I looked at the paper. It was printed on Ethan's corporate letterhead, Thomas's signature, steady, too perfect. Looked off. He hadn't written that clearly in months, not since the morphine. "This isn't from our family lawyer." I said. "He was lucid when he signed it," Ethan insisted. "He wanted this," Rachel said quickly, "a fresh start. There's a developer interested, $7 million for the land. We'd be set. You'd be cared for." A developer. They wanted to sell the Grove level, it replace a lifetime of harvests and sustainability, and giving back with concrete and cul-de-sacs. "You're talking about selling your father's life's work," I said quietly. "Mom, be reasonable." Ethan said, "The Grove can't last forever." I felt something rise in me. a slow-burning fury I hadn't touched since I once chased off a coyote trying to get into the chicken coop. I looked at both of them, my children, and said with calm steadiness, "Show me the will." Ethan hesitated, then pushed it forward. Again, I didn't touch it. "I'm going to bed." I said, "We'll talk tomorrow." But deep down, I already knew there would be no tomorrow conversation. They weren't grieving. They were executing a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the bed Thomas and I had shared for decades. Listening to the creaks in the farmhouse walls and the wind brushing against the orange trees outside, every sound was familiar. It was the silence in my children's hearts that had become foreign by morning. The smell of coffee wafted through the house. Not the warm, nostalgic kind, but sharp, bitter, imported Ethan's kind of coffee. I moved slowly, my joints aching more from betrayal than from age. When I came downstairs, they were already waiting, coats on suitcase pack. The suitcase wasn't mine. "We packed some essentials for you," Rachel said brightly. "We thought we could drive you to Willowbend today. Just to look, you don't have to decide yet. I'm not going to a retirement community." I said, pouring myself a cup. Ethan checked his watch. "Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. We close with the developers next week. You can't stay here." "I've lived here my entire adult life," I replied, voice calm. "This is my home. It's all of ours." Ethan said flatly, "Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go." I looked at him, and for a fleeting second I saw the child he used to be, knees scraped, eyes wide, chasing dragonflies near the grove, clinging to my hand as storms passed overhead. But the man before me now, there was no trace of that boy. I stared at him, and for the first time I truly saw him not as the boy who once followed Thomas through the groves asking about bees and drought, but as a stranger, a man who viewed me as a liability to be managed. I felt something sink inside me, not like a blow, but a quiet folding of something once sacred. "I need my medication," I said, stepping away, "and I'd like to grab some family photos." Rachel nodded, visibly relieved. "Take whatever personal items you want, we'll ship the rest upstairs." I didn't cry. I moved with purpose, not haste. My hands knew the house, every creak and hinge, like muscle memory from another life. But it wasn't just the medicine I needed, it was clarity. It was the piece of myself they'd forgotten I still carried. I gathered my pills, but also something they didn't know existed, behind a panel in the medicine cabinet, installed back in the 80s. When Thomas worried about burglars, I retrieved my passport and birth certificate. In the closet, I reached behind his old flannel shirts and pulled out a small, fireproof box. It was heavy. It held something more powerful than sentiment. A deed. The original deed to 20 acres of land, purchased in my maiden name before marriage. Land with water rights, land essential to any future development. When I returned downstairs, my purse was heavier, but my heart lighter. "Ready?" Ethan asked. "Sure," I said, allowing Rachel to take my arm. I let them believe I was defeated. We drove past the fields just beginning to bloom, past the elementary school where I volunteered, past the library where I read to children. But instead of taking the highway towards Willowbend, Ethan veered onto a remote county road. 20 minutes later, he pulled onto a gravel shoulder beside an empty field. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said as casually as if he were announcing a stoplight. "The house and business are ours." Now Rachel's smile faltered. "Ethan, what she'll contest the will make scenes. This is cleaner. She has clothes, her meds. There's a gas station 5 miles up." He opened my door, and just like that, they left me standing on the side of a road with nothing. Or so they thought. The car disappeared down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the smell of betrayal. I stood still, the wind tugging at my coat, clutching the small suitcase they had packed. It was a quiet kind of devastation. Not loud, not messy. Just a stillness so vast it pressed against my chest like the first moment after a door slams shut. The kind of silence that says everything's changed. For me, I wasn't afraid, I wasn't broken, I was free. I began to walk not toward the gas station Ethan had so generously mentioned, but toward town, toward my next move. My flats weren't made for gravel roads, and the early spring sun was already warming the back of my neck. But with every step, my purpose solidified in my purse was everything I needed. My ID, my passport, my medication, and most importantly, the original deed to 20 acres of prime grove land, land that Ethan and Rachel didn't know. existed land I had purchased in my own name before Thomas and I married. It was a precaution back then, just in case the business didn't survive. Thomas had called it our just-in-case safety net. Now it was my lifeline. Those 20 acres weren't just any land. They held the only natural water source on the entire property. Without it, no irrigation. Without irrigation, no grove and no development. My children thought they had cornered me, but they didn't understand the soil beneath their feet. They didn't understand the weight of legacy. But I did. Every blister that formed on my heel, every breath pulled through grit and sun, reminded me of what I had built. Not just the land, but the will to fight for it. After nearly 2 hours of walking, my feet were blistered and aching, but I reached the edge of Blue Haven and the familiar sight of Cooper's Gas and Grocery. It was small, old-fashioned, and unchanged, a place where people still called each other by name and paid in cash. I sat on the bench outside and watched the cars come and go. I didn't look like much, just a tired old woman with a suitcase, but I had something far more powerful than they ever would: the truth. Hank Cooper stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd known me for over 30 years. "Mrs. Carlyle," he said, his brow furrowing. "You all right? You look a little pale." "Just resting, Hank. Been a long day," I said. He looked at the suitcase beside me, then back at me with concern. "Real sorry about Thomas. He was a good man." "Yes," I nodded. "Yes, he was." He hesitated, then asked gently, "You need to use the phone if it's not too much trouble." He led me inside, past the shelves of canned peaches and discount cereal, to a small office. In the back, I dialed the number from memory. "Our family lawyer, Calvin Douglas." "Naomi." He answered on the first ring. "Surprised I've been trying to reach you. I expected you at the will." Reading. My grip tightened on the receiver. What reading? There was a pause. Ethan presented. "A will." I had concerns. "It didn't match the file your husband and I updated last year. I need your help," I said, my voice clear. "And your discretion. You have both my office 1 hour." I hung up and turned to Hank. "Do you sell prepaid phones?" He nodded. "A few." "Want one?" "Yes, and a bottle of water." He refused to take my money on the house. "Mrs. Carlisle, you need anything else? You just say the word." His kindness nearly undid me, but I didn't cry when I buried Thomas, and I wouldn't cry now. I had work to do, and I wasn't finished yet. Calvin Douglas's office was on the second floor of an old Victorian house on Main Street, just across from the town library. He'd been our lawyer for over 30 years. Calvin was the kind of man who wore sweater vests without irony and still believed in handshakes. His secretary Marge gasped softly when she saw me. "Mrs. Carlyle, Mr. Douglas is expecting you. Would you like a glass of water, coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you," I said. Calvin met me at the door to his office. He hadn't aged much since Thomas's last visit, just a bit more stooped, perhaps, but his eyes were sharp, alert. "Naomi," he said, not leading me to the desk, but instead to a pair of leather chairs beside the window. He sat across from me, his expression serious. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about the funeral, the fake will, the boardroom-like discussion, our kitchen, the drive, the roadside abandonment. Every detail. He didn't interrupt. He just listened occasionally, nodding, his face growing darker by the minute. When I finished, I reached into my purse and removed the fireproof box from it. I pulled the original deed to the 20 acres, the land Thomas and I had quietly set aside decades ago in my name. Calvin examined the document with a reverent sort of silence. This is gold, Naomi. This isn't just land. This is leverage with the water rights and the zoning. The developer can't touch anything without this." I know. He leaned back, tapping the edge of the deed thoughtfully. "The Warren submitted. It's a forgery." I had my suspicions when I saw the signature. It was too clean, too smooth for a man under hospice care. I knew it wasn't. "Thomas's will challenge it," Calvin said, "but that takes time. Meanwhile, we use this." He held up the deed. "You still have legal ownership of the most critical piece of the land. They can't move forward with the sale without your consent." "I want my home back," I said quietly, "and I want them to understand what they've done." Calvin nodded. "Then we'll make them understand. First, I'll draft a letter to the developer. They need to be made aware that the property is not what they were promised. Will they back out? If they're smart, they will. Developers don't like lawsuits, and they certainly don't like incomplete land rights." He stood suddenly purposeful. I also know a judge in district court. We can get a motion filed to freeze the sale until the matter is resolved. I looked out the window across the street, where a young couple was walking hand in hand, unaware of the quiet storm beginning in this small office. I don't want revenge, Calvin. I said more to myself than to him. I want truth and peace. You'll have both, he promised, starting now, by noon. The next day, Calvin had filed an emergency injunction to freeze any transfer of ownership related to Blue Haven Groves. A courier delivered the legal notice to the development firm Ethan and Rachel had been dealing with within hours. The deal was suspended. The developer, faced with unexpected legal complications, and the revelation that a key portion of the land containing the only natural water source was owned separately and undisclosed, began to backpedal. Their lawyers reached out to Calvin with urgent requests for clarification. I told them the truth. Calvin said, as we sat in his office reviewing documents, the land is incomplete. The water rights are not transferable, and, more importantly, your children do not have the authority they claimed that evening. I received a text message from Rachel. It was the first time she'd reached out since they left me on the roadside. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Ethan's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this? Fix this. I stared at the words on my prepaid phone. There was no apology, no recognition of what they'd done, just panic, now that the money was slipping through their fingers. I didn't reply later that night. Ethan called Calvin directly demanding explanations, trying to reassert control, but Calvin calmly informed him that all matters would now go through legal channels. They're realizing Calvin said that they miscalculated badly. They thought I had nothing left, I replied, but I had everything they forgot to value. He looked at me with quiet pride. You're handling this with grace, Naomi. A lot of people would have gone straight to scorched earth. I lived too long with kindness in my bones to become bitter. Now I said, but I won't be silent either. Outside the town of Blue Haven, moved on with its day, kids riding bikes, a dog barking in the distance, someone mowing their lawn. Life was still simple here, still honest, and I intended to keep it that way. The land would not be sold. Not now, not like this. The grove Thomas built, the legacy he left, was not a commodity. It was home, and I wasn't done protecting it. In the weeks that followed, I didn't return to the old farmhouse. I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Blue Haven's main street. It was a small place by most standards, but every inch of it answered only to me. No shadows of disappointment, no ghosts of betrayal. Just space to breathe. It had a small balcony, just big enough for a rocking chair and a few potted herbs. The place smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread in the mornings. It wasn't the home Thomas and I built, but it was mine, and that mattered. Each morning I'd sit by the window with my tea, watching the street come alive. I was no longer invisible in my own story. I started teaching again, quilting on Wednesday nights at the community center, just like before. I even began holding weekend workshops at the library, sharing what I knew about organic gardening and sustainable fruit farming. Teenagers came, retirees came, even young couples, hoping to start their own farms. People listened, not because I raised my voice, but because I spoke with history in my hands, the land we protected for decades. I donated the water rights and a trust to the Blue Haven Agricultural Cooperative, a local initiative that supports young farmers. They'd use it, not sell it. They'd care for the trees like Thomas had. That was the future. I wanted Ethan and Rachel kept their distance. I heard whispers that the developer pulled out entirely, that the fake had been formally challenged and frozen, that their reputations had taken a hit in their respective cities. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need revenge to be loud, to be real. I chose peace, but not at the cost of truth. The grove remained untouched, blooming, as always in spring, and every time I passed by it on my walks, I smiled not with bitterness, but with the quiet strength of a woman who had reclaimed not just her land, but her voice. They had underestimated me, but I had finally remembered who I was. I often think back to that moment on the gravel road, standing alone, with a suitcase I didn't pack, watching my own children drive away without a second glance. It should have broken me, but it didn't, because in that silence, I finally heard the truth I had ignored for years. Love is not loyalty without question, and being a mother does not mean tolerating betrayal. Just because you raised the ones who betrayed you, Ethan and Rachel believed they could erase me that, because I was older, grieving alone. I wouldn't fight back that. I had no choice but to hand over everything, but they forgot something before I was a wife, a mother, a widow. I was Naomi Ann, a woman who built something with her hands, her heart, and her mind, and I had never needed to scream to be strong, what they saw as weakness. My silence, my trust, my love, was actually the very power that protected me. If you're listening to this and you've ever been cast aside, underestimated, or treated like a footnote in your own life, I want you to hear this. Your strength isn't in how loud you fight, it's in how well you know what you stand for, and when you stand your ground, even quietly, it echoes louder than any betrayal. My grove still stands, my name is still on the deed, and my life, it's mine again. So to anyone who's ever been told this. So the story has ended, our wonderful friends. Are you still here at this hour? If you're still watching, still listening, then maybe, just maybe, something in Marjorie's quiet strength touched something in you too. Her story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about remembering your own name when the world tries to forget it for you. Sometimes life places us at a gravel road with nothing but a suitcase we didn't pack, and the silence that follows is deafening. But within that silence, that's where your power speaks. This story reminds us that you don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to scream to prove you matter. As philosopher Lao Tzu once wrote, silence is a source of great strength. And in Naomi's case, that silence was where the fire began. She stood her ground, not with fists, but with her legacy, with calm, unwavering clarity. And the truth? It always rises, even when it's buried beneath betrayal, pain, or years of being overlooked. So if you're someone who's ever felt dismissed, underestimated, or erased, remember this: you still have your story, your roots, your voice. And those are stronger than any document someone else tries to sign in your name. If this story stirred something in you, share it, like it, comment below, because your voice matters here. And maybe, just maybe, there's someone else out there tonight who needs this reminder just as much as you did. And when you're ready, we'd love to hear your story too. Because your truth, it matters.